Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really challenging idea about how we see our ancient past. We're looking at a source that asks a fascinating question. Are the very tools we're using to find our ancestors actually hiding them from us? Okay, let's get right into it. We hear all the time that DNA has basically unlocked all the secrets of prehistory, but the source we're looking at today asks something pretty provocative. In this huge rush to embrace genetics, have we accidentally pushed the actual people, their physical bodies, right out of the story?
So here's the claim, right? The source argues that we've become so obsessed with genetic data that we've started replacing real people, their bodies, what they could do, with these abstract labels and percentages. We've kind of lost sight of who they actually were.
So the main point is this. The author argues that these big genetic terms, like modern human or Western hunter-gatherer, and that's a really important label for a key ancestral group in Europe, have kind of flattened our view of the past. They're saying these labels hide the fact that there were physically distinct groups, like the incredibly tall and powerfully built people we used to call Cro-Magnon. Now, to really get what they're saying, we have to look at this crucial difference the source points out, the difference between the genetic code and the actual body. Okay, so look at this. It really breaks down the two key ideas. On one side, you've got the genotype. That's the DNA, right? The blueprint. It's fantastic for figuring out who's related to who and mapping out timelines. But then you've got the phenotype. That's the actual building. It's the body's shape, its size, its strength. And the whole point here is that we've been staring at the blueprint and totally forgetting about the building it created. So according to the author, this focus on DNA leads to some real problems. You've got bucket inflation. That's where a genetic tag like Western hunter-gatherer or WHG gets treated like it describes just one kind of body, which totally erases all the real physical diversity that existed. And then there's this idea of authority laundering. This is wild. It's where instead of changing a theory when new evidence comes along, you just give the old evidence a new genetic name. It looks new, but nothing's actually changed. All right, let's get into the evidence. The first thing the author points to is something you can literally hold in your hand: skulls. Okay, so a lot of this argument comes down to a measurement called the cranial index, or CI. And it's actually super simple. It's just a ratio of how wide a skull is to how long it is. The source makes a big deal of saying, hey, this isn't that old, sketchy race science. This is just geometry, plain and simple. And a low CI, that just means you've got a really long, narrow skull. And this table, wow, it just lays the whole problem out so clearly. On the left, you've got what the actual bones tell us. You see long skulls, average male height of 6'6", can you imagine? And a seriously powerful build. But then on the right, you have the generic labels we use today, which basically boil down to people like us. See the problem? The two stories just don't match up at all. And here's the real kicker, according to the author. This isn't some new revolutionary data they found. We're talking about tons of old measurements, from actual skulls that have been gathered for over a century. And the argument is that all that physical data has just been pushed aside, erased, as they call it, because these big, new genetic categories are what's in fashion right now. Next up, the author tells us to stop looking at the bodies for a second and instead look at the tools they were built to use. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. So, 30 to 50%. What is that? Well, according to the source's calculations, that's how much more wrist and forearm power you'd need to use a real ancient stone axe compared to a modern one. That is a huge difference in strength. And this table just drives that point home. We have this picture in our heads, right, of early farmers using these little antler picks, but then you look at something like the power axe. We're talking about a heavy stone head, a thick handle. This thing was an absolute beast. The source argues it was an engineered piece of technology, and you'd have to be big and have incredibly strong wrists just to use it effectively. And this all leads to a really powerful conclusion. The tool itself tells you about the body of the person who made it. You just can't separate the technology from the biology here. The axe's design, its weight, its balance, it basically has the physique of its user baked right into it. The tool is a witness to their body type. Okay, so the author has laid out this big problem, this disconnect between the DNA story and the physical evidence. So what's the fix? Well, they propose a way to get the record straight. First, they break down what they call the relabeling playbook. Basically, this series of steps they believe leads us down the wrong path. It starts by taking a physical description, like a skull shape, and turning it into a genetic bucket. Then you use percentages to make it sound like everyone in that bucket was physically the same. Before you know it, a genetic idea like WHG is being treated as a specific body type. And the final step? You just rename the old evidence to fit your new theory, instead of actually testing the theory itself. So, how do we fix this? The author suggests a pretty straightforward framework. First, a dual-track system. That means you always present the genetic data and the physical data side by side. They're partners, not rivals. And here's the big idea. They propose something called a trait passport. This would be a mandatory checklist of physical measurements, like cranial index, stature, stuff like that has to be published right alongside every ancient genome. No more separating the code from the body. And that really brings us to the core question the source wants us to wrestle with. Is this story we tell about our past a real discovery based on all the evidence we have? Or is it an invention, something we've built using only our favorite new tools while ignoring the old ones? It's a heavy question, right? It really forces you to think about how these stories about where we come from actually get made.